One day it started raining in Columbus, and it's never going to stop. Never.
Welcome to Portland.
Yeah. I'm building an ark and collecting 2 of every animal, so fear not, my friends.
Well, I'm building a moat around the garage so we can have an empire.
I'm going to call this an update, Captain. I don't know how much of an update it is. We'll have to wait to see what happens, hold our breath and see what happens here. But the headline from the Oregonian says, Francke Case, excited at the prospect of freedom as state considers options in Michael Francke case. So most of you will remember we covered the Michael Francke case last year in October 9th and 10th of last year, episodes 245 and 246. And that case is Michael Francke. He was the Oregon Corrections Director. He was murdered 30 years ago on January 17th, 1989 in Salem. And if you recall correctly, he was leaving work that day from what they have dubbed the Dome building. And on the way to his vehicle, there was some type of struggle that was obvious, and he was stabbed to death. Well, Francke Case is the man that was eventually arrested and tried and convicted in that case. Well, the headline that came out that I read was from April 19th of this year. And the reason why I say that I don't know that it's much of an update and we'll have to wait and see what happens is it sounds like certain people are trying to make some movement to right a wrong, but you know how the court system works. It's slow. It's slow. And then there are other people that are trying to stop this completely. So the idea is that we have a judge that came in and said, look, this guy, Francke Case, the judge says, I believe that he is innocent of this crime. He's been in prison, I think, since 1991. And he got life with no possible parole was his conviction. So this judge is saying, look, this guy is innocent and we should either do one of two things: release him or retry him. And I believe that in April they put like a 90-day, there was 90 days on this thing to figure it out, to come to some kind of conclusion. Well, we have the Marion County District Attorney, Paige Clark. She has assigned 2 prosecutors to re-examine this case. And now the case includes thousands of records, old tape cassettes of police interviews, and transcripts from the 4-month trial that took place in 1991. So they're going to review those things. But I think really the most fascinating thing to me about this whole situation is we have the victim's family. We have his brothers, Kevin and Patrick, who they came forward in a long time ago. I believe in the mid-90s they came forward and they said, hey, this guy that's sitting in prison for the murder of our brother, we believe him to be innocent. And the way that this kind of crumbled and fell apart very quickly was this man, Francke Case, was basically convicted off of these eyewitness accounts. And these aren't people that, if I recall correctly, these aren't people that said they saw him kill Michael Francke.
Right.
These are individuals that say that they knew that he killed him because of this, or this. And those people later came forward and said, look, I was coerced into giving that confession.
Right.
And then there was one individual that said, I made up a story and told it to the police just because I didn't like Francke Case. He had a beef with Francke Case, so he made up some kind of story. Well, so now we've learned all these years later that what convicted this guy, and I believe you and I really questioned the conviction when we covered the case, because all these people recanted their story. So that's like convicting somebody on DNA and then finding out later the DNA is wrong. We were completely wrong. And so the evidence, if you want to call it that, that convicted this dude, it does not exist anymore.
Right. But it's also going that DNA evidence is wrong. And by the way, it's wrong because the prosecutors and the detectives created that DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes an issue. And it's always going to be an issue on the idea, look, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. You have pressure to solve these cases. You have pressure to charge somebody with this. There's a man dead. Somebody needs to be held responsible. But we got to get back to a time where it's more about the truth and not just, well, we convicted somebody.
Right. Right. And so the state has come forward and said, well, we wanted to appeal this decision of either retrying him or releasing him. And I don't know the details of this because I'm sure that they're not releasing everything that's happening in these discussions behind closed doors. But my guess would be that they're probably more so appealing the thought of just releasing this guy. Because I think probably the best way to handle this would probably be to retry him. Maybe they can make a determination in advance if he's allowed to be out on bail or something during, leading up to that retrial. I would love to figure out with these old cassettes of the police interviews, because a couple of these people that gave statements, incriminating statements of Francke Gable, they've said that, look, I didn't witness anything. I didn't really know anything. I just happened to know Francke Gable. And I told them in advance, I didn't know anything, that I don't have a story to tell you because I don't know anything.
Right.
And then later saying I made up a story, or they helped me fabricate a story. And I gave that statement because I felt that I was being threatened by the police, by the interrogators. And so I would love to see on here if they can figure out, if we have these tape cassettes of the police interviews, I would love to know if they can figure out, hey, are these police officers that are doing and leading these interrogations, are they stopping the tape? Mm-hmm. And then it starts up again later. Stopping the tape, starts up again later. I'd like to see, that should be pretty easy to determine that right away. But it's really fascinating to me because most of the time when you see something like this, it's the victim's family that comes forward and they're like, you can't let this guy out of prison. He doesn't deserve a retrial. This guy's absolutely, guilty of killing our loved one. Mm-hmm. And this is the complete opposite of that. Not only do we have two brothers that have been very vocal about saying, look, not only do we believe Francke Gable to be innocent, but we believe that we know who might hold the answers to this case. Because if Francke Gable is innocent, then this is an unsolved crime. So they have pushed forward and said very publicly that they believe a man named John Krause to... I don't think they necessarily think that John Krause killed their brother. I think what they're saying is John Krause knows who did this or had right. Some involvement with it. So, but again, not only saying these things publicly, but they've also been raising money and awareness to this case because it probably would have just went away and Francke Gable would have been rotted away in a prison cell for the rest of his life, no parole. And it would have just been forgotten about. So, interesting what the Francke family is doing to help this thing along. So 90 days from the mid of April. So we should have something May, June, July. We should have something, I would think, by July, a determination of what to do in this case.
Yeah, but it's very... very scary to think that you could be charged with something that you weren't involved in, and then you just sit and wait for a very, like you said, slow system to work itself out.
Right.
And that's when they award people a lot of money for sitting in prison, but money doesn't give you time.
No.
And so it's very...
No, but what it could do is help provide him for a better defense if he is tried again. Um, this is one of those weird cases because remember we mentioned at least 3 other suspects that I can think of, and the big thing that the judge is saying here is not only do we have these people who have recanted their statements.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe these people are just liars or whatever. Maybe they were telling the truth. But he's saying on top of that, we had other suspects that were not presented at trial. So the jury and the judges they would have taken that into consideration, that there were other suspects, 1. And 2, we have John Kraus, who did confess to the murder of Michael Francke at one point. However, in all fairness, he gave multiple stories to the police.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is we have judges who have reviewed his statements and say, look, most of them don't line up with what we know occurred during this crime, during this murder. But there is one of the stories that lines up pretty good. But it's difficult when you have a guy that's given multiple stories, call them confessions, some of them including him as the murderer, and other confessions that do not include him as the murderer of Michael Francke.
Yeah, well, that's a good update, and hopefully some changes happen soon there. I kind of want your opinion on this. I was looking up this stuff on Scott Peterson, not the Scott Peterson that we all know and love to hate.
Yeah, love to hate.
But I guess this guy's Broward County Sheriff, and he was assigned to Douglas High School, the Parkland shootings in Florida. Mm-hmm. And he was arrested about a month ago. And so the question then becomes, is cowardice a crime? He is hired to protect the school. He did not. They have surveillance footage of him hiding for almost an hour. He never set foot in the school that he was sworn to protect. And I believe he's charged with 7 felony counts because he took cover outside instead of trying to stop the shooter. He will be the first police officer charged in any school shooting event. And there's a lot of rage towards this individual. I have not even seen anybody that came forward to say to have his back on anything.
Right. And but I think it's very difficult to be the one to have his back. It's not so much a question of, here we have a situation. It's not a question of did he do it or did he not do it.
We know he didn't. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know.
He's called the Coward of Broward.
Right. And I think this is a difficult one because I never like to so much have a hard and fast rule on how someone should behave when they're scared to death.
Right.
Okay. And obviously he didn't do what we all would have expected him to do, what he agreed to do when he took the oath to serve and protect. He didn't do any of that. But we got to keep in mind, he didn't do that because he was scared and afraid for his own life, his own safety.
Yeah, and that I think that's the big question is, did he, look.
Is there a crime here? Is there a crime here?
Because what happened, 11 minutes after the shooting began and he was hiding, police officers arrived, there were 17 dead, there were 17 injured, and Peterson kept hiding.
Right.
He didn't, once the other police officers were there, it wasn't like Peterson sprung into action and said, here we go. And we don't know, maybe Peterson has never been tested as far as the fight or flight mentality. I've said this before. I was doing bear crawls where you're really low to the ground, and to the right of where we're doing bear crawls were box jumps. And box jumps are notorious for, if you miss, you can get some nasty cuts on your shins. Well, I saw some lady's shin get split from her ankle to her knee, and it like opened up, and it looked like, whale blubber was spewing out. And I instantly got up, put my hands in the air, and walked to the other side of the gym going, oh my God. And that was my first real moment of, I'm sure there was moments when I was a kid, but the first one where I was like, that's fight or flight. And I was not fighting. I took off running. Where a lot of people, once she's like, oh, something is wrong, there's a bunch of people that ran to her real quickly, And so then it becomes, to me, it's like, was Peterson even in control of himself? Fight or flight, or fight or hide. You just wonder if he was just so in shock that he hid and just was frozen. And should he be charged with these seven felony accounts? It's weird to me. We normally charge people for their actions, not inaction.
Well, I will say outright that I'm a huge proponent of, fire him, take away his pension.
Yeah.
Because he's not a police officer. Let's face it. He may have wore the uniform and carried a badge and gun for years, but he's at the heart of it. He's not what he signed up to do, so he should not get any of the benefits of being that. So take away that. I do think he does need to be charged with something, because I don't mind setting the precedent to individuals going forward that sign up for this. Let's face it, it's a very dangerous job, but I don't mind setting a precedent to weed. I think what it does is it weeds out these types from going into that occupation. No,
I understand where you're coming from, but
I don't know if he should get 7 charges.
I don't think he should get any, because one, he didn't do anything. Like you said, if you're, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but as far as like with the Marines or Army, like if you do actions or you don't do actions, if you're supposed to do something in a test environment and you're supposed to, say you're playing capture the flag and you decide that you're just going to hide the whole time and not participate, they'll get rid of you. And he signed up for a job. He's not fit to do that job. Okay, you're done. You're not doing that job. And whatever benefits that you're supposed to get for signing up to do that job, you don't get those. You're not privileged to get those because you did not do the job. That's fine. As far as criminal charges, I have an issue with that because, again, what did he do that was criminal? What is the charge? Coward? He's a coward? Well, look, he's going to be branded that his whole life, and he deserves so. So, fine. Be that. But the problem I have with setting an example for this is you can go back to 1999 and look at how they responded to Columbine, and it was not correct. And that was the protocol, and they have since changed that protocol. But
it was correct according to protocol. It's not the best way to handle that situation. We now know that.
Right, and then they changed the protocol, and that changed the way law enforcement studied that situation and said, what can we do better? They did not charge every officer that sat there for hours with their, essentially doing the same thing.
But in that situation, you can't, because they're obeying orders, so to speak, because they're following, at Columbine, they were following protocol.
Right, I understand that, but what's this guy's protocol? It never states once where he didn't follow protocol.
Well, from my understanding, most jurisdictions, if not all of them, have adopted this new protocol to you go in and go after the shooter. Where at Columbine, the reason why they handled it that way back then was they didn't understand the nature of that crime and of that attack. So typically protocol would be that when you have an armed person or persons in a building or structure, and essentially it's a hostage situation is the way they treated it. And the protocol then was to you start communicating with the hostage taker and you're trying to talk them down. And what they've realized and learned, and we have as well, that in these school shooting situations, especially in the school shooting situations, it is not a hostage situation. So therefore you have to handle it differently. It's basically someone going in there with they don't want to take any hostages. They're attempting to shoot as many people as they desire. And therefore you have to go and become the aggressor and go after the shooter because they're not there to take hostages. I get what you're saying. He's done nothing different than how we used to handle this situation, with the exception of when his brothers in blue, his sisters in blue showed up to the scene, he still remained in hiding. He should have at the very least joined them. But I don't know.
Right. But again, my issue is that we can't measure this officer's fear. We can't measure what terror was going through his brain, what trauma happened to him as a kid. That there's so many things that could play into this, where maybe if it was on a Tuesday and he had a little more coffee, it would be different. Or if he was in a different state of mind when it happened, it could be different. To me, it seems like this individual was struck by fear and terror, and that enabled him to do his job. And yes, that makes you unfit to continue to ever do that job. But it's hard to measure that, and it's hard to know, like I said, we don't know if it happened on a different time, and it would be different to me if he did, other officers are here, then he springs into action. He didn't. He continued to hide. And again, to me, it's like, that's more signs that this overwhelming fear took him over and made him unable to do almost anything. So, and I think it would be different if he, not only did he hide, but once the other police officer got there, that he took off, that he ran away.
Yeah.
I think it really shows that he was enabled to do anything. And it's like, look, the guy's going to be called a coward, rightfully so, but I really just don't see, it's inactive. He's inactive, so therefore he's responsible. And the other thing too is it's really has changed kind of the narrative. More people seem upset about this police officer, the good guy with the gun, because we believe a good guy with a gun will stop a bad guy with a gun. But this officer did not go into a school and shoot anybody.
Correct.
And that's the real piece of shit here.
Well, of course.
And so I don't know. I see both sides. I mean, I could see, but, and I think the difference too is when you go, okay, well, he might be hit with 7 felony accounts. Okay, what does that mean? Time served. What does that mean? What does he get for that? What's the outcome of that? And when I'm looking through some of these reports about it, it's not really clear. I haven't really been able to find where it says that he's facing up to 10 years in prison. Or
I thought I saw 70 years.
And that's just ridiculous. Because we don't know. You don't know how you would react. You can sit there.
But we're paying him to react a certain way.
Right.
That's the
Okay.
difference between a civilian and an officer. And
no, I understand that, but where it becomes a little convoluted is, what if that officer has a heart attack? What if that officer has an anxiety attack? What if that officer has some kind of whatever it is? You know, I don't know. I don't know. Because I think I just think that's a blurry line. And we don't know how you would react. We don't know how I'd react. We don't know how any of these officers that have never been through that, we do not know how they would react. We would like to think we would know. And maybe this guy, maybe the Coward of Broward, thought he would react differently. You know, and I'd like to see what his record was before. You know, I know, for example, at my high school, we had a cop. And the reason why he became the cop at the high school was because he was continuously the last one to arrive at any scene. So, but that is, again, that's 96, 97, 98. This is before the national awareness of these, what possibly horrible things can happen at a school. I wonder today, would they put that same officer at that high school?
Well,
knowing that he had an inability, he would be the closest to a scene and get there last. You know,
but I think that too is part of the issue that needs to be examined.
Yeah,
was this officer there as more of a punishment rather than a post?
Right.
And
but then does that become his problem, or does that become the higher ups' problem?
It should be both of their problems,
right? But should they be charged with 70 years for putting the wrong guy at the wrong position?
But here's where America, you know, a lot of people react to the headlines, and you got to read the story, because being charged with 7 felony counts and facing up to 70 years in prison, we need to know the details of those charges, because most of the time we charge somebody with several counts of something that could, if convicted on all 7 accounts, would end up 70 years in prison. But the way that that's typically structured is that you can't be guilty of several of those other charges if you're guilty of some of those charges.
Yeah, well,
meaning that there's varying degrees of the same charge. So in this situation, I think what's very likely to happen, we'll probably have a situation where he'll get convicted of one of these charges, and that may only carry 3 to 5 years of probation. It may carry a light prison sentence. I'm for setting the precedent of holding individuals accountable for what they are paid to do, how they are paid to react to a situation and obey protocol. Now, regarding what you said about the police department, and I think you're probably right in this situation. I bet you this was not considered by his co-workers to be a great cop, and he may have been posted there more as a punishment rather than anything else. And I know of like you said with our high school, that it was kind of give the guy that really nobody really trust him in the field to do the right thing or to have their back. So
he'll be a truancy cop.
Let's just put him at the school. I would like to see, and I know that some jurisdictions, some police departments do that with the bicycle cops as well. I've heard from, it's not a rule, it's not on any books, but if you talk to some of the guys, they'll tell you, yeah, you get bicycle patrol in this department. You get bicycle patrol as a punishment. So
well, yeah, they could put me on a bike and I'd still be the first one there.
But the I'm more of a fan. I am a fan of having some type of law enforcement or security at these schools. I think it only makes sense. It makes so much sense that it's stupid not to do it. I think a person better suited for this situation may be ex-military, because we're really talking about a situation.
Well, this is like a one-man SWAT unit. Is basically what it is. If you put one cop out of school and a shooting breaks out, how many shooters? That's the other thing. This is hindsight. We know that there's one shooter. Well, again, at the Columbine, they thought there was possibly 5 shooters. They don't go in. They later find out that there's not 5 shooters or a group of shooters. There's a big group of shooters. There's 2, right? So then they go, oh, well, we made a mistake. We go in faster. How does he know how many shooters there are?
Right,
and so then you want what if a police officer goes in and there is 5 shooters?
No, I understand the situation, but I'm not the one writing the protocol. I'm just saying he didn't follow protocol, and that is essentially the problem and the issue here. I don't even go as far to fault him for not going after the shooter. I fault him for, the job is protect and serve. In this situation, serving would be going after the shooter. Protecting would have been to help evacuate people out of there, or to add some kind of assistance to get people out of there faster, away from the shooter. If you're too chicken shit to go after the shooter, at least have the stones to try to help some of these children get out of the building. And he did nothing. He crawled under a rock and stayed there. And
which I understand, but then again, the question to me then goes back to did he get struck with something that was out of his control?
Right, but that's where the court system comes in. He will have the opportunity to state his case and to defend himself.
Yeah, and what they're saying is, look, I understand the idea that you make an example out of somebody, but I think this is a lot more complex than people think. It's not just
it's incredibly complex. I don't,
and I think we have to be careful about this, but there has never been a police officer that has been prosecuted for their actions involving an active shooter, but the legal experts say it's unlikely that he'll be convicted on most of the charges.
Right, and I agree with that. Like I said, I think he'll end up getting convicted of one of these lesser charges with a slap on the wrist, so to speak. But it goes to me. It's no different than a pilot showing up to fly the plane and he's intoxicated or hungover from the night before, or that warrants charges in my mind, or a doctor that commits malpractice. People need to be
right. But what they're saying, and I actually agree with them. They're saying that just him being arrested shows that, hey, if you're an officer,
right,
and that's all I'm saying. We can't give this guy 70 years to make him an example moving forward. But the arrest starts with making him an example. Maybe there's probation, loss of a job, whatever. But he is not the scumbag that went in there and started shooting people. Right. He's the coward. And again, we don't know. Nobody can say for certain. I don't even think the Coward of Broward could say for certain that if it didn't happen 2 hours later or 2 hours before or a day later. You know what I mean?
But I don't even know what that means, because that's like saying, oh, Nick, you robbed I robbed a bank because I was broke. But if I wasn't broke, or
no, what? I think you're misunderstanding. We don't know for sure. We don't know for certain if his inactiveness was something that was voluntary, that he chose to do, or was he enabled to do.
Right, and that's why you charge him, and then he has the chance to defend himself and state his case in court.
Right, I get that.
But and also I want to be clear. I don't like reacting to the headlines. I don't think that there is a possibility that he could face 70 years in prison. That's just the headlines. That's to get people in and get people talking, get people discussing the issue. It's very likely that it's structured so that it's impossible to be convicted of all 7.
Well, right.
Meaning, if you're guilty of B, you cannot be guilty of A and C as well because it's set up that way.
Right, and this is why I think it's so gray. Is if you're a pilot that got drunk the night before, that was your action.
His action's running and hiding. It's
right, but
it's not like he.
No, the reason why that's gray is I question if that is a choice or his body choosing that for him. And that's where I think it's gray. I think it's different when you decide to stay up at night drinking or you go to the job with a drink. I think that there's a big difference between that. And I don't know if what he was doing was voluntary or involuntary.